Beginning our Daf, Mesechta Yevamos Daf. Begin 4 lines down at the top of the Yomit, where we are going back to a brisa we had brought in the previous Daf. The Gemara was in the middle of a discussion in these Dafim to explore the reason why the brisa needed to say, when it was telling us how we know that these 15 women are going to be exempt from Yibam Chalitza and they're going to exempt their tzaras, he said, oh, we know it from Aleha. It says Aleha by Yeshazach, it says Aleha by Chayis. Just like there's b'makam mitzvah, so to Chayis Isha, the Isra Erva, which we're going to have all other arayas from Chayis Isha, is also even b'makam mitzvah. So then the Gemara says, wait a second, why do I even need a leha to tell me that's going to be us? So why would I have thought that you'd be permitted to have a relationship with an erva that has a punishment of karas? So the Gemara says, oh, I would have thought to say asay of Yibam is deichalois asay sheyesh bekaras of a Chayis Isha and all other arayas. Says, where do you get this from? Where do you know I said I said, okay, we brought it climate census, we brought it source. How did I say? I say sheyesh bekaras. So I was thinking, was attempting to bring a raya where we had a pasuk that says that if someone is supposed to be executed, Behumos, you're supposed to execute them. So the Bryce had said, and this is the Tana Rabbi Shmuel that we had in the previous Bryce, it says, oh, so how do I explain Machalem Moishumas if someone does Chil Shabbos, which execution requires Chil Shabbos, that that's going to be a punishment of death? Oh, that's by other malachas, except for Mises Bezin. And this is the Bryce said, no, maybe even Mises Bezin is forbidden on Shabbos. So what do I do with Behumas? That's only during a weekday you execute, not on Shabbos. That's why I need it says the word Meishavos by the execution of the court. It says so you see the word Meishavos means where the courts are, and that is Isra even in the courts, that is we don't execute on Shabbos. Why do I need a pasuk to tell you that you don't do execution on Shabbos? Why would I have thought that you do? Because the say of executing is because of Chil Shabbos. So you see, says the Gemara, that a say is because. That's why you need a pasuk to exclude from that. And that we said, we finished the Gemara on the top of this Amid, that we said, no, that wasn't the Havamina. I didn't need a pasuk to exclude from a Seder Chaloisish because I needed a pasuk to exclude from a Kabul Chaimer. The Kabul Chaimer was that if Shabbos gets pushed away for the avodah in the Beis Hamikdash, and yet to execute a kohen that's a murderer, we're going to do that even though he's going to do the avodah. So then zicha that Shabbos, which is less than avodah, is going to get pushed away to execute, which is bigger than avodah. That's what I would have thought to say from that Kabul Chaimer. That's why I needed the pasuk, but we didn't finish off with the source for Aseder Chaloisasi Sheyesh Bekaras. And that's why Gemara continues, and the Gemara is going to explore how to explain the brisa now, based on how you reinterpreted the Havamina that I needed a pasuk for, that it was based on the Kabul Chaimer. So how to explain the brisa was like, so to speak, flip-flopping, saying yes like this, maybe not like that, maybe yes like this. So we're going to go back and explain. That's where our daf begins. Which corresponds to Bakad Zechon Acheskel, 20 Daf Achaim. Krishna is joining us for today's daf. Some of this is discussing today's daf, again, as we had said, a continuation of the need for the Gezer Shabbat, Aleha, where it says Ba'ishasach and the Chayis Isha, to teach the Isra, performing Yibam whatever. What do you need it for? We never had a source yet that I would think I say Dechal Isish because Kachim Mizbech, Kachim Bedek Abayis, Kachim Mizbech are Karbanis, Kachim Bedek Abayis are those things that are owned by the temple treasury. The well-known Davashirtz and Akal, one of the Yigam Amidah Shatar Najashban would say in the Bryce of Rabbi Shloimy Schwartzberg, right before Pesukah de Zimra, called Davashir Bechlal, whatever was in the general category. But and it comes to teach something, it's not going to teach us for itself, and it's coming to teach regarding the whole category. And another one of the Yigam Amidahs, Davashirtz Lidim Davachadash, something that's going to teach a novelty. If it was Bechlal and it teaches a novelty, you can't even return it to the halachas of the general category. The Farish has to explicitly tell you that it's going to go back, but if it doesn't teach you explicitly, it's not going to have the laws of the klal. Mitzayra is someone who has a neg of tzaras on his body, and he has to have 7 days of purity. Then after he tables on the 8th day, he has to go ahead and bring a carbon, and he has to also have a special procedure where he gets the blood sprayed on his behindos, which is his index by his thumb and his right ear and his toes. That's a special procedure which is going to be discussed in today's daf. Shalosh machnas halacha is certain individuals have to be sent out into machnas because they're tumah, some out of 1, some out of 2, some out of 3. Pinyav is like a mamatzina, what we find by one thing, but compared to something else. So again, like we said in the previous Daf, we had the Tanna Rabbi Shmuel, which was telling us B'chol Meshvei Seichem. The Torah tells you that Misa Bezdin is not Deicha Shabbos, because both of them have the word Shabbos. That even B'chol Meshvei Seichem, which refers to Bezdin, you cannot be Savar Eish, you cannot execute. Because we said otherwise, we would say it is Deicha Shabbos based on that Seicher Chalish B'karas. That would explain the need for the Gezeh Shabbat Leha to forbid the Yibam, because you would have thought it's good. So now the Gemara said, no, it's not because of Seicher Chalish, it's because of a Kal V'chaymer. What's the Kal V'chaymer? Like we said, because of a Void is more stringent, and you do a Void even at Shabbos. Still, the halacha is that you're going to take the execute the kohen is going to do it. So Shabbos that gets pushed away because of Avodah, therefore for sure it's going to get pushed away for that of the one who is going to do to execute the person who has to be executed even on Shabbos. So now the Gemara goes back. Now that's why our Daf continues and says, because this goes into part of the discussion. So and this is 4 lines down at the top of the Amud. In other words, as Rashi explained, you rejected the Raya B'Seicher. You tell me that the Havamina was that I would have thought to say that you would execute someone on Shabbos because of a Kal V'chaymer, as we said, because if Shabbos gets overridden by Avodah and the Avodah gets overridden by executing someone, for sure that would mean that executing someone would override Shabbos. So then how could you have said in the Brisa, Oy Eina Ella, you were saying that, or maybe no, maybe even Mrs. Bezdin would not be Deicha Shabbos without a pasuk. Why would I have thought to say that it's not? Isn't that a ban of Kal V'chaymer? You told me that, maybe I would execute on Shabbos. I said, no, maybe only on the weekday. And they said, no, maybe even on Shabbos. And they gave me a pasuk that says, no, you're not going to execute on Shabbos. What's the Eina Ella? Why would I have thought that you wouldn't execute on Shabbos without a pasuk? Says Gemara, this is what the Bryce was saying. Because Kvuras Meis Mitzvah Techech. The burying of what's called a mes mitzvah, someone who has no one to bury him, would disprove the logic of the Kal V'chaymer. Why? Because halacha is shedeiches avodah. The Gemara tells us in the first parak of Megillah that Gimel Beis from the word velachesai, which we're going to shortly mention now, when it talks about the halacha of certain individuals not being mitamid to their relatives, it spells out all the different relatives. So what's the point? You already told me you cannot be mitamid to any mess. Or the extra balachaysa comes to teach you that for your sister you cannot be mitamid yourself, but for a mess mitzvah, you're allowed to, even if you're kind on the way to do the avodah. So if burying a mess mitzvah is doich the avodah, yet beve'ein doich is a Shabbos. The halacha is a mess mitzvah you cannot bury on Shabbos. So therefore, I could compare it to murder. That even if it's doich avodah, it would not be doich Shabbos. So it's not a raya. You want to tell me Kal V'chaymer if something is Deich Avodah, if it's Deich not true. Mes Mitzvah could refute that. Mes Mitzvah is Deich Avodah, as we learned it from Velachesei, but it's not Deich Shabbos. No. So wait a second. So then when the Brisa goes back and says, no, maybe even on Shabbos you would be Deich Shabbos for the execution. Why would I think? Yeah, I thought you just proved it with K'vuras Mes Mitzvah. So Hadam, and that's when the Brisa goes back and says, no, K'vuras Mes Mitzvah itself. You're right. Shabbos Kal V'chaymer, based on the Kal V'chaymer, it should be Deicha Shabbos. In other words, that's what the variable was switching, saying, so wait a second, maybe I would say that Mes Mitzvah itself would also be Deicha Shabbos. Because of Avodah she Deicha Shabbos, if Avodah which overrides Shabbos, K'vuras Mitzvah Deicha Isa, burying a person who has no one to bury him overrides the Avodah, then we know that Mebalachesai. So what Mebalachesai is referring to is a pasuk by the Nazir. The Nazir, I have it on the Likutei Rashi in the bottom, that it says in the pasuk, Kol Yimei Hizir LaHashem, all the days of his Nazir to Hashem, Al Nefesh Meis Lo Yaveh. He should not come in contact with a dead person. And then it says, La'avev, La'imoy, La'achev, La'chaisei, Lo Yitamah. Now the problem is, you really include them all in Al Nefesh Meis Lo Yaveh. So why are you specifying these individuals? So the Gemara tells us that when it says La'avev, that's excluding for a mes mitzvah, which is, yes, his father is not going to, but his mother, but for mes mitzvah he would. When it says Le'ima, what's that teaching? It doesn't have to teach you regarding mes mitzvah because they already learned it from La'avev. So in the Sifri, they tell you that it's teaching you regarding another that's also a kohen, which has two kedushas. And there also, if his mother's not going to be mitamid, but he would be mitamid to mes mitzvah. And what does it teach you when it says la'achiv? That comes to teach you even if he's a kohen gadol and he's a nazir, that even though he's not going to be mitamid to his brother, but to mes mitzvah, he would be mitamid. And what does it teach? So that's the last one of the relatives that it mentions. If it's not teaching anything regarding this context, it's already maxed out all the kedushas, Nazir, Kohen, Kohen Gadol. So it's going to teach you someone that's going to shech his korban Pesach and to circumcise his son. That still isn't going to tell him the mes mitzvah. So you see that even though someone's going to go to shech the korban Pesach, is on his way to do the avodah, mes mitzvah is doicha. So then Shabbos shenichah from the avodah, so Shabbos that gets overridden for the avodah, in addition to the kavos mes mitzvah doicha, isn't a kavos chayim that kavos mes mitzvah would override it. And therefore, the Kavach Chayim would be appropriate, and therefore I would say that you would execute on Shabbos. That's why I need the pasuk that tells me Loisavaru, that tells me that no, that you now go ahead and execute on Shabbos. But again, it's because of when the pasuk mentions on my Shabbos, you're not allowed to do it. It's not because the Havamina was a Seiduchel because the Havamina was that it'll be a Kavach Chayim that you could do it. But then the Gemara says no, maybe it's not a Kavach Chayim because you see Mes Mitzvah it overrides Avodah, not Shabbos. But then when it says Ein Elav b'Shabbos, we're telling you that no, because maybe Kavos Mitzvah Taka would be Deicha Shabbos too. So I wouldn't know clearly what the halacha would be. So I learned it from Loisavada Ish B'chol Meshur Zeichem that even by Shabbos, which refers to the Bezdin, I'm not allowed to go and execute someone on Shabbos, but not because the Havamina was to say Deicha Loisish B'Kados, and that's what you see. Oh, a source for that. No, it's because I would have thought of to say maybe a Kavach Chaymer, which I wasn't sure about in the Brisa, and that's I'm telling you that no, you cannot. But again, the Gemara concludes that there's no raya for aseder chalesish b'karos. But then says the Gemara, but according to what we had originally thought that the reason why you need a pasuk of b'chol meshvei seichem was because if you didn't write, I would have thought to say that the pasuk of behumas of executing someone comes along with the chalei and over as a negative prohibition of doing havara on Shabbos. So my oyena dekama. So how could you say oyena that maybe it doesn't override? Why would you say it's not? Meaning the same question we just asked regarding the maskana that we come on, that the havamina was a kavach chaymer, and that's the pasuk is excluding. Fine, we explained that. But according to what we originally thought, that we wanted to bring a raya that you would have thought havamina, you would have thought to say that aseder chaleisish b'karos, and therefore you could execute someone on Shabbos because the assay of killing him overrides negative prohibition of karos of Shabbos, of chil Shabbos. So then why did the Bryce and Shmuel flip-flop? Why did he say, oh, you could do it on Shabbos? Oh, maybe not. Oh, maybe yeah. What was he flip-flopping about? Why would you say not if it's a Seder Chalishish B'Karos? So says the Gemara Hacham, and this is what he said. Because man Mekayim, how am I going to fulfill Mechal Lem? If someone desecrates by lighting a fire on Shabbos, he's going to surely killed. That's Mishah Malachas Chutz Misad Besin. That's other Malachas, except for execution of Misad Besin Derech Shabbos. But Misad Besin would be Derech Shabbos. Why? Because the Asa Seba Derech Chalishish. That was the first posit that the Bryce Rabbi Shmuel made that, oh, similarly I could execute on Shabbos. Because Basei Derech is because Hadar Amr, this is what the Bryce was saying when it says Oyena Ella, or maybe no, even Misad Besin cannot be Derech the Lav of Shabbos, because it has Karis. The Bryce itself was saying, when do we say Asa Derech is Leisa greater. It's just a generic negative prohibition. But Leisa just because Mishamet Leidadachi. Did you ever hear that it can override even the negative prohibition that has a punishment of Karis? That was the Oyena Ella of the Bryce of Shmuel, according to our Havamina, that it was referring to Asa Derech. It was maybe you wouldn't say it in such Asa Derech. And Hadar Amr, this is what the Bryce subsequently says, or maybe no, even on Shabbos you would execute. Is Atura say, and this is a very important principle in the concept of Aseh Derech. You think an Aseh that's Derech Es Leisa say that Lav Leisa say Chamimene, isn't a negative prohibition more severe than Aseh? When someone violates a negative prohibition, it gets lashes. Someone violates a positive commandment, doesn't get lashes. Aseh is less than a Leisa say, and yet still we say because Aseh B'Dachile, which is a well-known concept, the Ramban, because Aseh is out of love, and then the Leisa say out of fear, and even the Aseh is Derech. But essentially, in greatness, in severity, a Leisa is more severe, and still we say Aseh Derech. So then Malichum Rezuta Malichum Rabba. When the Bryce was going back, no, maybe you could execute on Shabbos, even though I don't have a source for Aseh Derech because the Bryce is saying, but why should it be Mechalik? Who cares a big severity or a small severity? Either way, a lot is bigger than Aseh, and still Aseh is Doichid. So why wouldn't it be Doichid even if it has Karos? That's why Tamalevim Leisavar, therefore you needed the Pasuk Leisavar to tell you that, okay, you can't know this from Svar, because we're not clear if you would say Aseh Doichid because or not. Comes the Pasuk, it says, no, you cannot execute on Shabbos because of the word B'chol Meshvei Seichem, which used that same word by the court. But again, one thing is, we did not yet find a conclusion for why you need a leha, because you don't know a seder chalishish b'karas. It was only the havamina, but we ended up saying that the Bryce was not referring to that. The Bryce was saying you would have said because of a kabel chaymer. So the Gemara is going back now on this that we had said that you need leisavaru, because if you didn't write leisavaru, you would have brought it from a kabel chaymer, and not because of a seder chalishish b'karas. So we're back to the question, so why do we need a leha? What was the point? I would never have thought that you could do yibum with a erva b'chais isha, because it's a leisavaru b'karas. And why would I have thought that you could? I don't have a source that you could do a seder chalishish b'karas. Says the Gemara, El Itzach, you're right. You know, it's interesting. You need a leha for a whole different reason. Not because we're falling off from a seder chalishish b'karas. It's not the reason why I would have thought you could do it. I need a leha because you would have thought to say, to have a high eshes ach. This whole halacha of yibum is what? Is his brother's wife. Now, a brother's wife is davar shlei b'chlal. It was in the category of what it says, Kikola Shiyasam Kol Te'ebes Eila B'Nichrasu. Just like all the arayas were included in the punishment of Karas, Eishazach is one of the arayas too. Yet V'yotzav in the Kalal Alamed, it came out of the category to teach that if he doesn't have any sons, you could marry the Erva of Eishazach. Now, this is one of the Yigam Amidah Shatar and Jeshabehen from the Bryce of Bishmol. It's not coming to teach regarding itself, and Lama called Kula Yatz, it's coming to teach regarding the whole category, which is that just like Eishes Ach is an erva, but it's permitted b'makam yibum, so to all our rights, including a chayis are also permitted b'makam yibum. The time like learn the brisa, this concept is taught davar shlei b'chlal, something that was in the category, v'yatzim l'kal b'chulu, and it leaves the category, etc. So Ketzad, the brisa illustrates this halacha. There's a pasuk in Meyuka that says, "V'nefesh asher teichel basam ezevach hashlamim." If someone is going to eat the meat of a carbon shlamim good tumasa love, and he has tumah when he's eating it. So therefore, the pasuk there mentions that that's something that's forbidden, and that's going to get karas. Now the problem is about shlamim b'chlal kachim hayu. Shlamim was already including karas, where the pasuk says elsewhere kol isha sheyikar mekol zarachem el hakadishim ashekdishu is going to get karas. So b'lam yatzu. Why is there another separate pasuk that talks about shlamim getting karas? That's lahakish alein melemecha. That's to compare to all the other kachim, and to tell you, mashlam yuchadim kachim is that shlam is distinct, that it's a certain category of kachim. It's kachim that are brought on the mizbeach as a carbon. Of kol kachim mizbeach. So to all kachim of the mizbeach, they're the ones that get karas. You have to kachim very bias. That is the kachim of the temple treasury. That if someone eats it with a spiritual impurity on his body, he's going to be potter, because the yotzav in the klal lamed lo lamed al atzma yotzav lamed al kula yotzav, to teach that all those who have the pasuk recovers only kachim mizbeach. Says the Gemara. So therefore hachanami. So let's say the same thing over here. That eishazach. Here we have the eishazach. Bechlal kol arayis. So it was included all the arayis that marrying even a deceased brother's widow is also. Now, why did it go out and singled out to say Yevamos Daf that in the Yevamos situation is mutter is actually a mitzvah? To use this principle that we said, to use and to tell you, you're just like a brother's wife is permitted. And also all the category that was part of what's called a rayis, they're all permitted. Oh, okay. Therefore, we need the Gzeir Shava of allow to tell you that no, that all other rayas are going to be potter from Yibum Chalitza. But if not, I would have thought to say, based on the principle of Rabbi Shmuel, that government that was Yotza, Lalamad, I'll call Kul Yotza, they're all going to be permitted. The Gemara rejects this, however. And the Gemara says, me dummy, can you compare the two? Meaning, Hasam over there by the Isser of Tumah by Kachim, Klal Be'Isser, the general category was what's all forbidden, that someone who's tummy cannot partake of kachim. Uprat be'isser, and the specific was also an isser. So therefore you could say lo mayatza. Why are you singling out shlamim from all kachim? We already said all kachim has kachim. Why are you singling out shlamim? So he said, okay, it's coming to tell you that the category of kachim that you get cursed for is only like shlamim, which is kachim mizbeach. The problem is hach over here by arayis, by yibum. The klal is be'isser. The klal, the general category, is telling something forbidden. All our rights are forbidden to have an intimate relation with them. Uparat beheter. This that you're singling out, Eishes Ach, is not also an Isser. It's in the opposite. It's telling you something that's mutter. So therefore, that's not the same thing as Yotzim Klal Alamid, as if it's singling out and it wants to teach you something regarding the general category. It's not even the same thing as the general category. It's actually teach you something very different. It's something teaching the opposite. Says the Gemara, Holoi Dami, you cannot compare this idea. In other words, it's not this drasha, because it's a davar hachadash that's teaching. It's teaching something new. Rather, it's only compared Ella. This drasha is lodavar shalei b'chal, one of the other Yigul Midas of Nishman. Something was in the category. And now it's teaching you something novel that you have never heard up until this point. You cannot return it to the general category and not to say the category is like it. Until the pasuk explicitly returns it to it. So therefore, without allow that I would not know other arayas would have yibum, because it's only Eshes Ach that is a unique thing that it's teaching. To tell you, like learn the Brisa. Something that was in the general category. And then, one of the specifics is taught a very novel halacha. You can't return it to the general category. The pasuk explicitly tells you it's going to be the same as the general category. So in case of household, so the Brisa illustrates this halacha with a pasuk in a yikra that's referring to the Hasham Mitzayra. This is in the coming parasha where in Sefer Vayikra, where it talks about the Mitzayra has to bring an Asham. So the pasuk there says, "V'shachan has hakavas." He's going to slaughter the lamb, the carbon Asham. In the place where you slaughter the chatas and the oila, in the holy place. Why? Because like a chatas, that's the halacha of this asham that is going to be for the kohen. Now, what is the pasuk teaching when it says like a chatas is the asham? That if it's telling you that this asham should be slaughtered in the northern part of the Azara, which is where the chatas is slaughtered, but it already says a different pasuk, v'shachat es hakeves b'mkoim sheyishchat es hachatas. We already know that the asham is slaughtered where the chatas is. And if it's to tell you that you have to spray the blood and then regarding the eating of the asham, so it's just like all other hashamas, which is included in this week's parasha, Parashat Tzav, where it says Zeis Teres Hasham, and it tells us what the halachas of the asham is. So why do I have to say a special by Hasham Mitzayra that its halachas will be like the chatas? Oh, so it says the Brisa Matam Levi Kechatas Asham. So what actually is a teaching Kechatas Asham? So I'll tell you why. Lefishiyot Hasham Mitzayra, because Hasham Mitzayra was excluded. It was taken out from the general category of all other hashamas. Lidan Badavra Chadosh. There's something very novel about the Hasham Mitzayra that you don't know about all other hashamas. What's that? B'boyin Yad, by his thumb. B'boyin Regel, by his big toe Hayamanis that are on the right side. That there's a special halacha that the blood has to be sprayed on his digits. Now, since it's yatzim mechlaloi, so yachol lo yehetoin matan dam ve'imur megam mizbech. You would think that it would require the regular spraying of the blood and the sacrificial parts to be put on this mizbech that every single Hashem has, because it's yatzim lidim devar chadash. So the old cloud that you say by Hashem, I don't know that you'll say over here by Hashem Mitzayra, because it's lidim devar chadash. Also, that's why we needed the pasuk that it says kikachatas ashahu, like the chatas is the asham, to tell you ma chatas to the matan damei mumigam is be'er, just like a sin offering needs to have that you spray the blood and the sacrificial parts goes on the altar. Of asham of Mitzayra, the guilt offering toy matan damei mumigam is be'er also has to have the blood and the imur put on the mizbeach. Now, so v'ilay hadrid kra, and if I didn't have the pasuk telling me how I would have said, l'may benafik nafik. For what it was taken out, meaning that you spray the blood on his behindness, for that it's taken out. Or l'may benafik lenafik. What it's not taken out for, meaning what it doesn't specify, which is matan dam by mumigam izbeach, it's not taken out. Therefore, I need a kichat to the Hashem. Says the Gemara, coming back to our sugya. So hachinam here also. How I would have thought to say that ishasach the ishtarah. These one that's yatzel lidim adaba chadash, eshesach, chiddush, an erva, a woman that's a sister-in-law that you're allowed to have an intimate relationship. Yeah, it's a davar chadash. But shar rayis loy, other rayis, no, would remain asur even in the even situation. Why would I think it's not comparable to the klal? It's not yatzel kol lamid. It's yatzel lidim adaba chadash. The klal is be'ist in the pratzis behet. It's not similar to the halacha of the carbon shlamim that you eat in the state of tumah. Here's comparable to the Hasham Mitzayra. That's just like the Chadash, which I wouldn't say that you compare the two. So back to the question so we have no pasuk to teach us otherwise, and why would I think to say that that I need to have the pasuk of a leha for. So it says the Gemara, Ella, rather, I'll tell you why I need a leha to exclude a ches isha from the halacha of yibum. A different pshat. So you would have thought to say, Tisa b'mamatzino me'eshasach. Did you learn that what's called mamatzino means what do we find? What we find over there, we should say over here. It's called a binyanat. What is that? Ma'eshasach miyama, just like a brother's wife, which is an erva, you do yibum. So too, a different type of sister-in-law, your wife's sister, he also do yibum. Meaning any erva, what's the difference? A mamatzino binyanat. Forget about Asidach relationship and cutters. Forget about because we're going to learn it out from the pasuk. No, based on the mamatzin. Shemar says, wait a second, me dummy. Can you compare the two? Hasa by Yishas Achas Chadi Surah is one erva. Hachatei Surah here, it's two erayas. It's your brother's wife, and it's your wife's sister. So that's two isurim. How could you compare one issur to two isurim that you're going to say the mitzvah yibum? Says the Gemara, interessant svar. Now the thing, what would you say? Hoyel ve'ishtiri, since it was permitted the issa of eshasach that she had on her when his brother died without any children, so ishtiri. So it's also permitted the issa of a chesisha. What's called hoyel ve'ishtiri? Once it's permitted, it's permitted, and we're going to go across the board. Now, not where do you get this idea that you'll say once something's permitted, we're going to permit other things that would generally be forbidden?
There's no mitzvah of yibum to that. No mitzvah of yibum to the wife's sister.
No, but she's also your brother's wife. Meaning it's the brother married, you married sisters. So when you have two isurim, so you would think that because every erva it has to be the brother's wife. That's what the mitzvah yibum is. But it's also another erva. So the Gemara says, and where do we find this? The time looking at the brayso, it's a little bit complicated, this brayso, but the brayso is talking about a mitzayir, which Rashi in Masechet Pesachim says that. So it just explains that the procedure of a mitzayir is that he has to go through a 7-day purification process. At the end of the 7 days, he tables and he has sundown. And then on the 8th day, what he does is he comes into Machne Leviah. There's 3 Machanes. Machne Yisrael, Yerushalayim, Machne Leviah is the Har Bayis, and then you have Machne Kahuna, which is in the Azar. So he comes into Machne Leviah to Shar Nikoner. Now Shar Nikoner is unique, that although all the Sha'arim, all the gateways of the Azar were sanctified, Shar Nikoner was not sanctified with Kedusha of the Azar. Like it says in the Pasuk in the Yikra, the Hemer HaKoyin Matar, the kohen who's purifying has to place as the isha mitar, the man who's being purified, and he puts him lefnei Hashem. Now, the azar itself he can't go into, but he could stick in his behoinas, as we spoke about. The reason is because a mechusik kippurim, which is what he has not brought his atonement yet, cannot come in to the azar. As the Gemara says in Market of Chesma Beis, it says Tomei Yiheh includes a tvul yom, and oitum asabai is like still he has some tumah. That includes a mechusik kippurim, where if he would go into the mikdash, it would be chayav karas. So that's what we're discussing. That's the starting point. A mitzayra comes into Machne Leviah, the Har Bayis, but he cannot come into the Azara. But he has to be in the Azara because he has to have the blood of the carbon sprayed on him, which cannot go out of the Azara. So what he does is he sticks in. He's allowed to come in partially. Comes into the Shar Nikoner, which is not sanctified. So that's a mitzayra. Shechal Shmini Shaloi, where his 8th day, which again, like we explained, is the day that he brings his karbanas, and he has to come to the Har Bayis on the Temple Mount, and he stands in the Shar Nikoner, he sticks his hands in the Azara so that the blood from the Behoinah should be put on that. Now, although, as the Bach adds on in Ois Beis and Rashi, although that Mitzvah is actually centered of all 3 machnes, he's the most severe of all the tumas, there's Zav and there's many different tumas, he sent out all 3, but on day 8, he's permitted to come into 2 of the 3 machnes. But into the Azara, he cannot come in, as the Gemara says, like I said, for Market of Ches, but he can't be out of the Azara because the blood's going to be invalidated by Yotzei. It's leaving the perimeter it's allowed to be. So putting in his hand is what's called Biyah B'Miktzis, a partial entry. That's not considered coming in. So therefore, you're allowed to spray on it while he stands in the Shar Nikoner. That's by every mitzvah. But like the case gets a little bit more complicated. Let's say this is the Erev HaPesach. Let's say this is on Erev Pesach. Now, to complicate things further, he had a seminal discharge on this day of Erev Pesach. Now Rashi says, has a different understanding, but Rashi says, the reason why we're picking carry, and why not, let's say, a tumah of sheretz, or nevela, he touched a dead animal, or some dead sheretz, it's because tamei sheretz, even a tamei mess, someone who touched a dead person, are allowed to enter into the har bayis. As the Gemara tells them, Pesachim Daf Samach Zayin that it says, "V'yikach Moshe's atzmas Yosef." Moshe Rabbeinu, who was a Levi, brought the bones of Yosef with him. So you see that even the dead person itself, you're allowed to bring it to Matan Labiyah. For sure, tamei mess and a tamei sheretz. But a Balkadi is more severe, cannot come into Machna Leviyah. Now, the Shari Nikana, like we said, we're not sanctified with the Kedusha of the Azar, as the Gemara says over the Pesachim that pay him in base. Now, it rather has the status like the Harabais, which is Machna Leviyah. So a Tmei Mace could go in over there, but a Balkari has to be sent out of two Machnas, like a Zav, as the Gemara explains in Perikei with Varm, over there in Pesachim Samach days, when it says Zav, and all things like a Zav, which includes even the Balkari. So now things are a little bit more complicated over here, because since he's a Balkari, and he has a locha like a Zav, he can't even come into the Harabayas to come to the Shar Nikoner to get his thumb sprayed with the blood of his carbon, which the blood cannot leave the Azar. So what happened is v'tavel. So this guy taveled for his carry. So Amar Chacham, the sages said, although generally a tful yoim, which is that he immersed that day, didn't have sundown yet, a tful yoim of carry cannot be nichnas, cannot come into the Harabayas, because every tful yoim is still like he has his tumah for, let's say, the laws of truma, which you know you have to wait for Erev Shemesh, and for Kodshim and for the basic English, which that you have to actually wait for your karbanis if you have one, which carry doesn't have one, but he has to wait for sundown. So in Tvul Yom, we still consider him as Tameh regarding his carry. So he would not be able to come into the Harabayas to come to the Shar Nikra, which has Allah like the Harabayas. So although generally a Tvul Yom cannot come in, Zen Nichnas. This individual could come to the Harabayas, to what we call Machna Leviyah, to stick his hands in for the Bahinas, that he can be purified from his tzaras, which that's the only way, is to get his blood of his carbon sprayed on his thumbs, to eat his carbon pesach that evening. Why? Why could he come in? Because mutav sheyaveh aseh sheyesh bekaras. Better that there's a positive commandment that if he's not going to stick his hands in the Bahinas, he's not going to be purified to eat his carbon pesach that evening and not bring the carbon pesach as a chiv of karas. Better let that mitzvah say that has a punishment of karas. The Yitcha say and override a positive commandment of sending out the Balkari from the Machana, Shein B'Karas, which does not have a punishment of Karas, because like Rashi explains, the punishment of Karas would only be in coming into the Azar. This guy's not coming into the Azar. He's coming only into the Shar Nikoner, which was not sanctified. And he's going to stick only his hands in for the Bahinas and be purified from his tzaras. And then he'll be able to bring his carbon pesach that into the Azar to Shecht and to eat his carbon pesach that evening when he becomes purified from his carry. So better let the Aseh Sheyesh B'Kadas override the Aseh She'im B'Kadas. So although really as a Tvul Yom of carry is not allowed to come into the Harabayas, he's allowed to come in. What's heißt? It's Aseh She'im B'Kadas. I'd rather have the Aseh Sheyesh B'Kadas, because if I don't let him come in, guess what? He's not eating the carbon pesach tonight. Why not? Because he was a Mitzayir and never got purified.
Eating carbon pesach is nicht kores. Makir is a carbon pesach. He could put a shliach.
But you can't. If you cannot be able to eat it, then you cannot bring the carbon. So he's not going to be able to have his carbon pesach that evening. Maybe you say Einis, why you say Einis? Who's it? That's what the Gemara is saying. They're saying there's Aseh Sheyesh B'Karas. That's going to override the Aseh She'im B'Karas.
If somebody's tameh, then you can't eat the carbon.
Right.
So that's
Right. But he doesn't have to be. That's a discussion elsewhere in Shad. It doesn't have to be. So if he doesn't have to be, so then that's not a patur. You could fulfill this Aseh Sheyesh B'Karas. This Aseh She'im B'Karas is getting in the way. But Aseh should be daicha. That smaller Aseh is what the Gemara is saying. This Aseh Sheyesh B'Karas should be overriding this Aseh She'im B'Karas. Now, the truth is, Bam Rabbi Yechanan, which Tais discusses, is Rabbi Yechanan and Amoira disagreeing with Atana, but he says, Dvar Torah, really, he says, according to biblical law, Afil Aseh Lesba. It's not true. It's not even a positive commandment for the Balkari not to come into the Harabayas. I don't even need to say Aseh Sheyesh B'Karas, Aseh Sheyesh B'Karas, not even Aseh. Because remember, he quotes the pasuk in Dibur Yom and Beis. It says, "V'yamid Yehoshaphat b'Kal Yehuda." Yehoshaphat stood by the assembly of Judah, meaning that was a day when the Jewish people were purified from the tumah that they had. And they did this lefnei chatzah chadashim, under the new courtyard. So my chatzah chadashim Tosfos proves how we know that this refers to the azara, the chatzah. What's the new chatzah? So Rabbi Yochanan says, why is it a new chatzah? Because shechidshu badvar, they introduced something new. What did they introduce? Remember they said tful yoim lo yikonis lamachn leviyah. A tful yoim cannot come into the machn leviyah, into the Har HaBayis, which sounds like they're really midaraisa. Although tful yoim is not fully pure, it sounds like midaraisa actually he was allowed to go into machn leviyah, just not into machn shchina, to the azara. So Rabbi Yochanan is saying it's much lighter, it's much easier to understand why we're going to let him come to Har HaBayis. It's not even deraisa. It's just it was rabbinic. It was introduced at a later point in time. Okay, but the Gemara concludes the raya. Mama Ula says like this. Ula is in a Masechta Zvachim Daf Beis and Beis. He says matam. Now what's he saying matam? So Rashi gives us the background. Ula is of the opinion that biyah b'miktzas shma biyah. A partial entry is considered that you came in. So they had asked on Ula, it says, wait a second. From this halacha that we were just quoting here on our daf, that the Mitzvah who's a Tful Yoim from Keri, on his 8th day, on Erev Pesach, could come into the Har HaBayis and then stick his thumbs through the Shara Nikon into the Machna Shchina, that how could he come in and stick his hands in? But you Ula hold Biyah b'Miktzah Shma Biyah. So therefore what? Although we understand how he could come into the Har HaBayis, because yes, you're saying not coming into the Har HaBayis is a Asay She'im B'Kars. And Asay She'yesh B'Kars, a Pesach could override Asay She'im B'Kars. But the Bahainos, how are you sticking in your hands? Both of them are Asay She'yesh B'Kars, because the Gemara tells us in Menachos of Chavzayim Beis that a Mechusi Kippurim, which is what this Mitzvah is, he didn't bring yet his carbon, because it's not done until the blood is sprayed on his thumbs. If he goes into the Mikdash, the Machna Shchina, his punishment is kares. Now, and I don't have to say, let's say a Tful Yom of Keri, but Tful Yom is more severe than Mechusi Kippurim. Mechusi Kippurim already had his Her Shemesh. He just didn't, the next day already, he just didn't bring his carbon. So for sure, Tful Yom of Keri, and all other Tumas, for sure is a problem. And you say Biyah b'Miktzah Shma Biyah. So how's this guy sticking his thumbs in? He's a Bal Keri. He's a Tful Yom. How are you getting in over there? So Ula answers, says, no, Mitzvah is different. Why? Since it was permitted for him a partial entry, litzaratoi. Why? What do I mean? Because every single mitzvah is a mechusi kippurim on his day 8 when he's sticking his thumbs in, which is a punishment of kares. And the Torah obviously is telling you you're allowed to do that, be a miktzas, because that's the only way to get your blood sprayed on your thumb, because the blood can't leave the azara. So the Torah is telling you that it's mutter. Even though if he's a mechusi kippurim, he should get kares, because Ula is saying, yeah, but be a miktzah shma biyah, but the Torah is telling you it's permitted. Oh, so hutter, so it's also permitted likiduyai. Once the Torah is telling you could do it for his saras, even the ishtari. Oh, you see from Ula's teaching that once we permit you one isser, so the other one slides in. Going into the mikveh, there's only room for one, slides right in behind him in that turnstile, goes right in. That's the same thing. However, ishtari. Once it's permitted. And that's how you know, that's how Ula explains this brisa, that on day 8 he would be permitted to stick his thumbs in. What's heißt? The mitzvah, but your balkari also. So the keri is not permitted. No. Ishtari. Once it's permitted. So therefore, that's what I would have thought to say is why you need a leha. Why would I think you need to have a leha? Already mata ishazach. It's okay. Ishtari. So then we permit, even though she's osach ishtari or bitoy or whatever it is, same klal. Problem is, says the Gemara, no, we're not finished yet. Do you really think that this is similar to Ula, comparing Achais Ishtoi, and that's why you need to have a lao to the halacha he's talking about? But it's getinta with Chesem and Aleph, Teina Chechel and Nasem Nes. A little bit of a cheshbon over here, but not so difficult. Now just the wordings are a little misleading. That's where, like Rashi says, if the one who died, the brother who died without any children, if he had married his wife first, therefore that makes it on his brother, Aishas Ach first. And then the living brother marries her sister. And then it gets added on the Isachis Isha on the Yevamos. So when this brother dies without any children, you remain what gets permitted is the first Isser Eishes Ach. So I could understand the Migud, the Ishtar, the Isser Eishes Ach. Once it's permitted the Isser Eishes Ach. You could also permit the subsequent Isach Isha. That's exactly Ula's teaching. Because since we said he permitted first earlier Tzaras, which was first, so that which was piled on, the carry, which is later, is also going to be permitted. But if the living brother married his wife first, which therefore made that wife of the dead person, which he wasn't married yet, that brother, made that wife Isra Isha, and then the other brother who ended up dying, he married that sister and then made it an additional Eishes Ach. So that comes at Isra Achais Isha Kadam. That makes it the Isra of Achais Isha came first. So although the later Isra is permitted of Eishes Ach, but the first one remains in its place. Because it's if you say like you're building a building, this Asa. Ula was saying that if the original Isra falls away, so all the compounded Isra fall away. So if the Isra Eishes Ach was first, which is the dead brother married that sister first, and then the living brother married the other sister second, so you could say, okay, once Isra Eishes Ach falls away, so too Achais Isha. But if the living brother married that sister first, making the other sister Achais Isha first, and then the brother who died married the second sister after that, that means Eishes Ach was second. So when the brother dies and this Eishes Ach is permitted, that doesn't take away the ground floor of Achais Isha. Achais Isha is still there. And says the Gemara, and even if the dead brother married first, which Eishes Ach was first, still can compare it to Ula. Because over there, the one who sees Kerry on the 8th day, he's already permitted from the first Isser to put in his Bohinus before he saw Kerry. Because the moment it was already, once it was a Aloisa Shacha, once it was already from nets, it's permitted. And he was already had the heter. So here also, this would make sense if, let's say, the dead brother married the sister first, and then he died first, and then the Issa Ishak was permitted, and then the living brother married the sister. The Chazila de Beini Beini, where there was an interim period where it was totally permitted, and that's where you would say that maybe we permit Achais Ishtoi. But if the dead brother married first, and he didn't die, and then the living one married the sister, and then the dead brother died, there was never a time period that was ever permitted. Because Mila Maida Ula, wouldn't Ula agree Shemrod carried Balil Shmini, that if let's say that guy saw carry on the night of the 8th day, Shem Nachnas Yadav, he cannot stick his hands in tomorrow the Ba'inus for his thumbs because of the carry that's getting in the way. Because Shlayotze, he never left from his Saras, Bashah, any moment Shegru Lahayim Bakarman that was permitted to be a carbon. Because before his Saras was permitted, he already got his carry. So where do you get this idea from Ula to tell me, however, Ishtari? So the Gemara actually says, interesting conclusion, the Gemara comes out. You know what we needed, this whole sugi of Allah to tell you that we would exclude Achais Ishtoi from Yibum? Is Heicha de Nasa Meis Umeis, Ma'achach Nasachai. It's only where the dead brother married, when we say the dead brother, meaning the one who ended up dying, he married one sister first and then he died, and then the living brother married the sister afterwards, then that woman who was already permitted from Eishes Ach, before he married the sister, will remain mutter, even though she's also now Achais Ishtoi. Because that's the only case that's comparable to Ula. Ula's case was, you were day 8 as a Mitzayra. In the morning, you're already able to stick in your Behinus, because the Torah tells you allowed to. And then, at 11 o'clock in the morning, he gets carried. So, I'll carry you. I can't even go to the Arbayas. No, you could, because say Dechalesi, how am I going to stick my thumbs into the Machne Shchina? Why? Because you already were mutter. But if the carry came on the night of the 8th day, you never had a Rabbi, you were never permitted because you were about carried before you ever had the heter. You're right, you wouldn't be permitted. And that's exactly what allows for. I don't need a leha. Of course I don't need a leha. So we don't say I don't need a leha. The only case I need a leha for is if the dead brother married that sister and died, and Eishes Ach is permitted, and then he married the sister. Then I'll say, and that's what I need a leha for. It takes good. Thank you for anything.